All right. Welcome, everyone, to Who Can I Be Now? Redefining Identity After Brain Injury with Karen Sumption. Some of you have been here with us in classes with Karen before. You know the lovely experience you have had in the past, and we'll get to have again the way that Karen presents their information and her perspective on some really important topics that are very personal to the brain injury community and neurodivergent community as well. So Karen holds certification as a peer counselor, also as a victim advocate, and she also is a certified health worker. So she has some really valuable person-centered alphabet after her name. So, so anyway, thank you again for being here. My name is Reggie. I'm the Education and Resource Manager here at Brain Northwest, and I look forward to learning with you. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Reggie. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really should have called this webinar, Who Can I Be Now, Part One, because this is a lot of big information. And as I was sort of putting it together, I realized there was no way I was going to be able to cover everything that kind of goes into this super complex idea that we all have, thought about in some way or another. So I'm going to try to hit some of the big ideas and some of them are a little bit complicated. So I will do my best to kind of break them down into more concrete terms because some of this stuff gets pretty heady. Um, but I'm really excited to be talking about some of this kind of murky, amazing stuff about identity and self-identity. Yeah. So while I present, I always turn my camera off. As Reggie said, feel free to turn your own camera off or stay camera on, whatever's more comfortable. And we'll definitely have some discussion at the end. So as I was sort of thinking about this topic, it's such a really very big topic. Um, I kind of wanted to put a flag in where I wanted to sort of start talking about it. And again, I apologize for this every webinar. My slides are very wordy. Um, and I just am rolling with that at this point. But the idea of a before self and an after self is incredibly common among survivors of brain injury. It's also common in the neurodiversity community where I come from. I don't have a brain injury, but with more and more folks being diagnosed as adults with different forms of neurodiversity, there's also an idea of a before self and an after self, and trying to figure out how to integrate those into something that feels coherent. Because there can be a big difference between how you process things, memories, emotions, your physical ability. Um, and that's, activities of daily living, what you did for work, what you did for fun, um, as who before your injury and after your injury. And and even as you kind of move through time post injury, you can struggle a little bit with who am I? Because you may find that you start to regain some capacity in some areas as you move through heal, work on rehabilitation, or just time passes. You may regain some abilities in some areas, but not in others. And this can kind of shake your whole definition of self. And I want to kind of take a second and plant a flag here as well to talk about what I mean when I say identity and the concept of the self. So, who we think we are is really a fluid construct. And we may struggle with it, when we have something significant and life-changing happen, like an injury, but really our idea about our identity and who we are is something that we've built and rebuilt, built and revised since we were children. And our idea about ourselves and our identity, can cover a whole lot of things, including, what we do for a living, did for a living, or want to do. Our religion of either origin, the family you were born into, the community that you were raised in, or by choice, where you live. I grew up on the East Coast, but I've now been on the West Coast for as long as I was on the East Coast. And so I always thought about myself as an East Coaster, but that may not quite be so true anymore. Your ethnicity, your race, your gender, how you present that gender to the world, what your sexuality is, your education level, age. I mean, that definitely changes how we think about ourselves, how we identify politically. There's so many different components that we use when we think about how we identify ourselves. And it also include some self-image, right? Some of that is objective, right? I have brown hair. I have blue eyes. I am 5'7" tall. But some of that is also your self-image is constructed over things that you've been told directly or indirectly as you've sort of moved through the world, and it forms your beliefs about what you do and are. Like, I'm fat, right? I'm shy. I'm bad at math, but I'm a good writer. I can't dance. I am a terrible singer. So, things that experiences and feedback that you've had as you've moved through the world are also things that we all incorporate into our self identity, our concept of the self. So just to kind of map this out a little bit differently, it's the same basic thing, but there's a lot of different ingredients that go into our identity, our sense of identity. And just to kind of go clockwise, I mean, I talked about personal characteristics. Those can be objective or um, information that you gleaned as you kind of went through the world. Your family, so your family of origin, your marital status, your parental status. Are you a parent? Are you a grandparent? Your position in the family. I'm the oldest sister. I'm the youngest brother. I'm now the elder of my family. Economics, the class that you were born in, the class that you live in now, whether you have access to generational wealth, um, financial literacy, your preferences, right? Things that you like and you don't like, food, hobbies, entertainment, the kind of music, the experiences that you've had, education, the jobs you've had, whether you're an immigrant, you've been in the military, and again, places you've lived, societal, your appearance, how you present your gender. Do you do you identify as female and you dress very feminine, or do you identify as non-binary and present in a more androgynous way? Your physical and mental health, so your ability to do stuff, any diagnoses, illness, conditions that you live with. your lifestyle and habits, and then values, which religion, creed, philosophy, political affiliations, etc. And the reason I want to sort of show this sort of wheel of an incomplete wheel of all the different components that go into how we construct our definitions of self is some of this stuff actually probably hasn't changed very much pre and post injury, but many things have. So I wanted to just kind of take a second and talk specifically about brain injury, where with the neuroscience of identity, there's a few areas that are related to our concepts and understanding of the self and identity. And it's mostly in the prefrontal cortex. And in the prefrontal cortex, there's um, there's an upper layer and a lower region. And the ventral medial, so sort of the medium in the middle, is a region in the brain that puts together ideas about the present and the future self. And it helps to kind of help us create sort of a consistent identity over time. And an injury to this area can physically cause us to have a difficult time feeling like our identity is consistent, either pre-injury or post-injury, or just even day to day, week to week. And also, neuroimaging shows that different injuries to different parts of the brain can actually break connections or change connections between the areas that hang on to memories that we use to really define ourselves, and being able to access and understand those. And those are often called emotionally salient memories, right? And in this context, an emotionally salient memory is moments or experiences in your life that were really emotionally charged, or they made you feel like they were really significant in shaping who you are. And those can be anything from somebody close to you died. It can be anything that when you sit down and somebody were to ask you, what are the five things in your life that made you who you are, right? Those memories are the ones that have that attached emotional salience to it. And injuries to different parts of the brain can can lead to what's called post-traumatic identity disturbance. So it is actually lowers our ability to be able to integrate, to weave those pre-injury memories and post-injury experiences into a story about ourselves. So there's a couple of different things that can actually happen physically that make the idea of defining ourselves a little bit more challenging. And just like I always do when I talk about the brain, I also like to show a little bit of a image of the brain. So really, when I was talking about the frontal cortex, that's going to be in the frontal lobe, but those other connections could be scattered in different areas throughout the brain. I've also done a webinar on this, but I wanted to mention it because I think it also has a lot to do with struggling to redefine ourselves post something significant like an injury or a diagnosis. And it's grief, right? When we survive something significant like a brain injury, there can be grief. And we feel kind of weird about it because in our culture, grief is very much associated with a irreversible loss, but we define that loss as usually the loss of a person or a pet or something significant like that. But and with a brain injury, we can have really good days, we can have really bad days. Um, and so it's hard to feel like we have something to grieve. In fact, a lot of survivors talk about, well, I don't think I can grieve because, particularly people with traumatic as opposed to acquired, they're grateful they're still here, right? We're grateful to even be alive, so I don't have anything to mourn, right? I should be thankful I'm still alive. Um, and but there's a sense of grief when we don't know how things will turn out. And this grief is called ambiguous loss. And there was some work done on it. Pauline Boss was one of the well-known clinicians that did a lot of work on the idea of ambiguous loss. And the ambiguous loss occurs without closure, um, due to the complicated and uncertain outcomes. So we're not only necessarily grieving like, oh, I'm a different person now, we can also acknowledge we don't know what's going to happen now. And that is definitely a kind of grief that is worth exploring and giving room to, um, because we can miss a version of ourselves that doesn't exist. We can feel that kind of survivor's guilt or survivor's gratitude, which is I'm so glad that I survived. Um, and there is some, but we're up against grief is for a death and the fact that our society in the United States, we love a comeback story, right? We love a comeback story. The athlete that returns to the field after a really just atrocious injury, right? The soldier who reclaims like their and can get back on the battlefield, right? And the survivor that becomes an inspiration, right? They overcome and not only gain back their abilities, they gain new abilities. And these narratives are motivating in their way, but they can also impose pressure and make us feel really awful when that's not what's happening with us, right? And it kind of implies that there's a miracle recovery that is possible. And that miracle recovery implies that, a full return to how you were is not just possible, but it's expected. Right? And when we continue to struggle or have challenges months or years later, we can feel a lot of shame about not just bouncing back. And the truth is that recovery is it's never linear. Um, Functional improvements, we can continue to gain improvements in areas for years, right? Um, but really healing is less about figuring out how to return to your old self, to your pre-injury self, and more about integrating who you are now into a new self concept. And you hear this a lot, not just here, but other places. You hear about the plasticity of the brain, right? that the brain is plastic and that we can create new connections and strengthen existing ones. And because identity is so deeply rooted in our brain, we can, right, rebuild, make new connections, and strengthen our identity. There's a couple of psychological models that help us with reconciling who we are today with who we have been up to this point. And whenever I talk about different models, I always want to point out not everything's going to work for everybody. And most of the time, people are successful kind of thinking a little bit about these as a buffet, right? Taking some stuff that works for you and integrating them into, into kind of a personalized plan. A lot of what I'm going to talk about is work that you would do with a therapist or a mental health professional. But there's some stuff that we can do on our own, and I will also talk about those. But what I found was all of the things that I was looking at when I was trying to figure out how to redefine my own life. Because I was diagnosed with autism at age 48. And so that meant I had 48 years without having any idea that I was autistic. And I just thought I was broken or stupid or just difficult or lazy. I could go on, right? And also probably, much of my life I thought I'm just straight up mentally ill. And once I found out that I was autistic and that all of the things that I struggled with for the first half of my life were really about struggling with a world that wasn't designed for the way my brain processed information. And anything I did that seemed lazy or stupid or broken or difficult was my way of trying to figure out how to negotiate that world without any tools or knowledge. Once I realized that's what I had been doing for 48 years, I was really angry. I was really, really angry and really sad and also extremely happy and excited. But I had to go back and sort of revisit that life and all of those struggles and sort of redefine them and put them in a new bucket that wasn't just I'm broken. And what I found is the techniques that were helpful for me and helpful for other people that have gone through something similar and having to reconstruct their self-identity is they all come down to radical acceptance. And radical acceptance is incredibly uncomfortable. Radical acceptance in order to pretty much have any sort of, you know, moving forward and reintegrating a sense of the self, it requires that we, have all the big feelings, right? Because I said I was angry and resentful and sad and disappointed and happy and relieved. Um, I had all of those feelings, and then I had to have a very frank conversation with myself about some things that were true. And radical acceptance states a couple of things, and I tried to kind of aim these um, towards injury specifically. But it says these things, and they feel like they might be a little bit harsh, but they're said without any judgment or value, right? And it's the first one is something happened, right? Something happened to us, and it was an injury of some kind. Okay? that seems pretty straightforward, right? This injury altered some aspects of ourself. Many of these aspects were important to how we defined our individuality and our place in the world. That's true. Over time and with effort and rehabilitation, we may be able to regain some of the abilities we lost or be able to participate again like we did before the injury to some extent, but not fully. We may also experience some unexpected gains because a lot of folks say, for all the things that I've lost, I've also gained some stuff that I wouldn't have had before my injury. I gained patience, I had to, or I gained some deeper empathy for folks that are struggling with different parts of their life, or I really revisited my priorities and I maybe work's not as important, family's important. So refiguring out what is really important can be a gain. But these are the last two, which actually also seem extremely innocent, can be two of the more difficult pieces to just accept, which is today, who we are right now is who we are. And who we are tomorrow comes tomorrow. And in order to start to rebuild a sense of wholeness after a life-changing injury, we want to go back and think about who we were and we want to go forward and think about who we want to be. But this is all that you I know you've all heard mindfulness, and but this is sort of the key of it is in order to do any work like this is we need to just be able to say no judgment, no value. Today, who we are right now is who we are. This is what we have to work with, and that is okay. Okay. And who we're going to be tomorrow is who we're going to be tomorrow. And we can do things to set ourselves up on a road to success towards goals, but we need to just have a moment where we acknowledge that this is what I got now. This is what I'm dealing with. This is who I'm this is all these are all the things I have to offer. So oh, I need to put a space there. Sorry about that. A little bit of of an error. One of the models that can help, and before I go into this, I want you to think about this with some caveats, okay? And the caveats is it's gonna sound like the continuity social identity model is is doing exactly the opposite of what I just mentioned in radical acceptance, which is to look backwards. But what this model does is it reminds us that there is a through line for us. When when I talked about these, some of these haven't changed, right? Some of these, no matter what, have stayed relatively consistent. There is a through line between who we have been and who we are. Let me flip back to this. And being able to spend some time thinking about that through line can give you some comfort, right? And the key is to continue with things that you can do that you used to do, right? So it's important to maintain social ties, relationships, participating in groups. If you were in a church group, if you had a walking club, if you had a book club, if you had something like that that gave you pleasure, and it's something that you can still participate in, even with modifications, being able to continue doing some of that stuff does help make you feel a little bit sturdy as you start to figure out some of this other stuff, the stuff that has changed. Okay. Hobbies. If there were things that you really loved doing, but they have become difficult to do the same way, there's still potentially ways that you can participate. They just may need to be modified. I have a really good friend that had an acquired brain injury, and she and I are knitters, and knitting is a big comfort was to both of us. And after her injury, she really struggled to hold knitting needles. And it was really, really exhausting. And she missed it. But what we found is that there's knitting looms. I don't know if and it's if you've never seen a knitting loom, they're often like round or they're long and they have pegs on them. And instead of keeping all the stitches on the needles, like you would with knitting, um, you instead have all these stitches on these pegs, and then you just use a little pick to move from peg to peg, the yarn from peg to peg. And it's, she still gets tired and needs to put it down, but a knitting loom is easy to put down. You don't drop all your stitches. And she's still participating in an activity that was a really, really big part of how she identified. She was a knitter. She made little blankets for the sorry, I'm blank from for the Humane Society, for shelters, for pet shelters. And that was something that gave her a lot of pleasure and a lot of meaning. And she's doing that again. It's slower and she's using a slightly modified technique, but she's still the knitter that makes blankets for puppies and kittens. And the idea is to maintain, right, a crucial sense of continuity that there wasn't a big stop, right? So you had an injury or I had a diagnosis and our life it wasn't like our life to that point, and then blew up and start like we are still the same person in many, many ways. We have to integrate some new ideas and some new skills and let go of some others, but we're still fundamentally the same person. And this was, I just thought, a nice quote from one of the studies. Belonging is art was one of our backbones. I mean, we're humans, we're social animals. So being able to reconnect to a role that was meaningful to you, even if you have to do it, you've got to perform it differently. If you are a father, you're still a father. If you're an artist, you're still an artist. You may need to reconnect and modify how you parent and how you make your art, but it doesn't make you less of a father or less of an artist. And then this one, I'm gonna go through a little bit quickly, which is the narrative therapy model. I want to get through it so we can have some discussion. And because I think for a lot of folks, this is going to be really familiar. When you think in your mind about going to therapy and what happens in therapy, or when what we see on TV or in the movies, a lot of time that's based on the narrative therapy model. Tell me about you. Tell me about the things that have happened to you. Tell me about how you feel about the things that have happened to you. And if you're doing narrative therapy, sometimes it's helpful to also, because you're usually doing it, unless you're doing group therapy, you're often doing it one on one, and you have no idea if your experience is similar or different to other people's. And one study that I found talked to therapists and mental health professionals that work with folks that have acquired brain injury, so mostly stroke survivors. And what they found was that there was four non-sequential stages that folks went through as they were telling their stories. So tell the same story, but you kind of go through four different themes. One they called sanctioning a radical break with one's previous life. And what that meant was, oh my God, everything is different now. Everything is different. I'm a totally different person. Everything is different. I live in a whole new world, right? Two, assuming a sense of salvation, as well as irreversible adaptation to the limitations associated with one's condition. What that means is we are grateful that we're still here and frustrated that we are not the same person, right? We survived, but survival required us to be different, right? Then feeling different and disabled. I'm broken. I'm broken now. I am broken. I am ruined. I can't do anything. I'm useless. All of those feelings. And then eventually considering new possibilities. This is who I can be and I want to be now. So in narrative therapy, it usually combines storytelling, journaling, guided reflections, and it really, clinicians will often use the idea of life chapters, exercises to kind of map who we were before and how we've evolved. These are things that we often think about in therapy, but are really, really, really useful in helping us reintegrate a sense of self. Um, again, grateful to be alive, but I miss the old me. No one understands what it's like. If I can't do things exactly like I did before, I'm a failure. And I've discovered strengths I never knew I had. And part of doing narrative therapy, of doing talk therapy, is being able to move through and recognize that these emotions, these responses are absolutely normal, right? And these are actually pretty normal responses to any kind of significant change, injury or otherwise. So I did a little bit more about this, but I'm just going to skip that for now because I wanted to get to, so what does this all mean? So it means that identity work is proven to be best done, right, with somebody who can guide you. But I didn't want to just leave you with the sentiment like, okay, go get yourself a therapist, because that's not always something that people are able or ready to do. So if you're struggling with your identity, both pre and post injury, there's some stuff that you can start to do all on your own and in your own time. And the first one is to practice that radical acceptance. And the best advice I ever got about radical acceptance is you just got to say it till you believe it. And it may feel like you're lying or being silly, but if you just tell yourself over and over, eventually you do start to believe it. Give yourself time, permission, and grace to mourn. Um, you know, you have definitely there are things that are worth mourning and avoid I like toxic positivity, right? Toxic positive. Well, you lived through it, so you should be grateful, right? Um, of course you should be grateful, but that doesn't cancel out any mourning or loss that we may feel. If there were groups or activities you enjoyed before and can still participate in or modify to make them more accessible, show up. Show up. It can be scary, but show up. Try. And tell your story to yourself. So I did recently a webinar as well on using art, and there's a lot of ways to do it. If writing is comfortable for you, you can journal, but you can also make art. You can record a journal, you can use dance, or you can use movement, whatever appeals to you and feels meaningful. But tell yourself the story of who you are. And these little bits of self-narrative, they're not something you have to share, right? But telling yourself your own story can help reframe it. And reframing it and becoming more comfortable with it, you can integrate it. Find peer groups like this and connect with people who have similar experiences. There's not much that can make you feel better than not feeling like you are the only person in the world. And that's just it. Just hearing other people that have been, even if it's not exactly the same, anything that's similar, just not feeling alone is so huge. And remind yourself that life changes unexpectedly. What if we, even if we're not neurodiverse, even if we don't have injury, stuff happens. Life happens. This is all stuff that is not just about, folks who have survived an injury or have a diagnosis of neurodiversity. Somebody can just be rolling through their life and something changes and everything changes and you get the rug pulled out from underneath you and they need to refigure out who they are and who they want to be. And this is not just something that's thrown on our shoulders because of injury. A lot of this is just the work of being human. And the other thing is to remember to laugh. Always try to remember to laugh. If I were to tell you the two most healing things for me when I was trying to get over my feelings about spending most of my life with no help and no tools, the two things that happened were that helped the most were finding peer groups and laughing, laughing. Because also when you laugh, it's not just physically, but good for you, but you are connecting to yourself, right? There's there's not much, there are few times where we're all more honestly ourselves when we're laughing, right? And so I wanted to leave some room for questions or ideas that have worked or techniques that have worked for you all or that haven't worked.
I love that. Let me stop the recording and we will open it up. This is always such a rich part of class.